Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Welcome, dear listener, to Fear from the Heartland. I'm your host, Paul J. McSorley. Set aside some moments now and take an adventurous ride on a journey into the psyche of some talented writers. They will dig into your being and titillate you. Oh, I love that word, titillate. While the stories may not all take place in the Heartland, I am delivering them to you from the Heartland. My intention is to strike fear and confusion into the mind, soul, and yes, the heart. This is Fear from the Heartland. Happy Thanksgiving, Heartlanders, and welcome to episode 17 of Fear from the Heartland. I'm your host, Paul J. McSorley. Thanksgiving always reminds me of a story about a young couple ready to take their relationship to the next level. In this case, the young man was invited to meet the family of the young lady he was dating. This first meeting was to take place at her house over a Thanksgiving meal. While seated around a huge table filled with all the traditional dishes the holiday is known for, and most participants having filled their plates, the young man felt some gas building up inside him, brought on by the previous night's festivities, partying with friends. He knew if he moved, he wouldn't be able to leave the room without a noisy exit. He decided if he could let out a little of the gas, he may experience some relief. No longer capable to hold it in, he farted, hoping it would be silent. But no such luck. It was audible, and to his pleasant surprise, the father sitting at the head of the table exclaimed, "Rover!" The young man, unknown to him, realized by nudging his foot forward, the family dog was laying at his feet. He was ecstatic. Everyone will blame the dog for his noisy emanations. He decided to let a little more out as he was still uncomfortable. Again, the girl's dad blurts out, "Rover!" The guy is so pleased with getting away with his deceitful emissions, he throws caution to the wind and expels what is left. The father loses it and nearly screams, "Rover! Get the hell out from under there before that boy shits on you!" Two very strange Thanksgiving stories tonight, centered on macabre guests and table fare. They are brought to you by a couple of friends of Fear from the Heartland, Eli Pope and N.M. Brown. Let's get after it. Country folk are known to have feuds, from land boundaries to loose dogs terrorizing the livestock. Sometimes, when as one neighbor steps across that line of age, their perspectives of what's worth fighting for change. Thanksgiving is the time to count blessings you've received and make amends with those you've not seen eye to eye with. A shared meal can usually solve about any problem if entered into with the right spirit. Sometimes, though, it don't matter how hard you try. A line's been drawn too deep. Football, beer, brisket, family secret dishes to share with neighbors on a traditional holiday. What could go wrong? And now, for your indulgence, Thanksgiving from Hell. Chapter 1. Man's Best Friend. The sound of Dwayne's Dodge diesel pounded a steady thump with a deep cadence as it idled up the dirt drive to the barn. The sun was setting, but it still hung just above the ridge that rose above their farmhouse. No snow yet, but Dwayne's bones shivered deep as his chilled hands gripped the steering wheel while it jerked back and forth from the tires wrestling the ruts. He glanced down at his grip. His fingers began to cramp. Damn cold arthritic joints seemed to let him know that winter was a-comin' nowadays after turning 50. He could feel snow before it ever came, and it would be here before Thanksgiving, which was about 2 weeks out. He scanned the fence line looking for old Tick, his short American bulldog and pit mix, who always sat at the top of the hill by the barn waiting if he hadn't been lucky enough to get to ride with him. Surely he hadn't run off again. Damn portly friend was smarter than he should be in some ways, but dumber than a box of rocks in others. But he and Tick were true friends through and through to the end. As the Dodge slowly pulled up to the barn, Dwayne eased the gear shift into park and scrutinized his surroundings once more. Nope, no fat dogs sitting and waiting today. Dwayne's wrinkled cheeks stretched a bit from the smile growing as he had thought of last summer's escapades, battling wits to keep Tick from slipping out and wreaking havoc. Scott Maynard, his neighbor, and he had shared some harsh words over Tick, frolicking on Scott's place. According to Scott, the neighbor to the east, Tick was growing quite an appetite for chicken. Live chicken. Scott's chickens. Good boy, Tick. He quietly snickered as he sat, letting past thoughts mingle in his head. That damned neighbor's chickens and roosters were always causing a damned racket over here, waking him and Annalene up too early every single morning. Only difference was, he weren't no prick about it. So, if Tick could sneak over and take one out occasionally, things was square in his thoughts. He reminisced digging the trench around the backyard and laying that invisible fence wire to keep old Tick at home and away from the chicken ranch. The sad look his faithful boy wore as he cinched the transmitter collar around his chubby neck. This ought to keep you hunting ass at home and away from that asshole's chickens. Another snicker ended with a guffaw. I hate to do it, boy, but Scott'd just soon pepper your butt with birdshot or more. And I love you, buddy, but I ain't gonna pluck pellets out of your round ass. I'd do the world for you, boy, but your hind end is off limits, a bridge I refuse to cross. The next day, after pulling up the drive and heading into the house, had Dwayne scratching his head when Tick weren't there waiting at the back door. His wife, Annalene, laughed as she told him the story about Tick. Dwayne, that dang dog of yourn is smart as a fox. I was out back in the screened-in porch reading my book, and I kept hearing this high-pitched squeal. It sounded like it was a mouse coming from inside of Tick. He was laying as close to that trench he had dug as he could. Pretty soon that noise began to fade, and old Tick got up from the ground and slowly walked over the pile of dirt and headed Scott's way with nary a care. It didn't make him yelp like the first time or two. Dwayne smiled to himself. His smart bully had somehow figured out he could lay next to the invisible fence to let his collar beep with the warning sound telling him he was about to get a shock if he moved closer. That critter just laid there until the damned battery went dead. No more shock left in the collar. I knew that dog was smarter than the average pooch, Dwayne answered. Nevertheless, Scott's gonna shoot your smart dog. I suppose Tick ain't as brainy in the long game as he thinks. As Dwayne sat daydreaming, he began to smell the diesel fumes leaking up into the cab strong, but he was deep down memory lane and smiled as he had concocted the next way to outsmart Tick. He pulled that collar off, and Tick looked up at him like he had won the battle. Little did he know, but Dwayne had just drilled a hole in that danged old speaker so it couldn't give no warning sound no more. Next morning, Tick didn't know what to do when he wrapped that collar back around his woollied neck and marched him out the back door and turned to leave without him. Dwayne felt so damned proud of himself, even if he did see Annalene shaking her head in disbelief. How much you spend on all that stuff Tick is making you tear up, Dwayne? Maybe you ought to just take your furry friend with you, instead of matching wits with him. That was all his little old sweet potato had to say to him, but Dwayne was satisfied with his line of action. He had finally fixed the problem, for a day or two. Annalene told him that third evening she had never seen old Tick move as quick as he did. It was as if Tick knew if he just bolted across that trench and kept going, the electric sting would only bite for a second and then let go and be gone. Hell, Dwayne was just about ready to shoot old Tick himself, but with the holiday coming, he reckoned he felt soft about losing such a smart dog. Dwayne shook his head with the thought and smirked. He knew he couldn't ever get rid of Tick. Tick was his best bud. A damned holiday miracle happened instead. Before he knew what he was doing, Dwayne's finger had dialed up the Maynard's number after he decided to invite him to Thanksgiving dinner for he had time to change his mind. Dwayne felt just as surprised as Annaline's face showed shock when she heard words she had never guessed would come out. It's time to mend differences and be neighborly. Don't ask me why, Annaline. It just happened. If the Pilgrims and Indians could do it, he paused, I can by God do it. Dwayne Lee Johnson, Jr. Annaline shook her head as she continued walking up to him, arms opening up to hug him. You never cease to give me warm shivers. Her eyes warmed and she licked her lips seductively. I reckon my cockles are warmed up tonight. She pulled him in and leaned in toward his ear, her lips brushing against it. Warmed and frisky, baby. He smiled and reached around to give a squeeze to her backside. I'm old and grumpy sometimes, but I ain't dead nor blind. I still got wants and needs. He smiled. Chapter 2. Husband's Bestest Friend. Dwayne had put the happiest smile on Annaline's face she had worn in a long time. She was nestled into his chest before she rolled over to be face to face. I thought I had lost you for good to that damn dog for certain. She grinned. I know they say man's best friend is his dog. I was beginning to think it was true. She ran her finger down Dwayne's chest. What's up with you? Inviting my family to Thanksgiving? Hell, inviting the Maynards? She looked deep into her husband's eyes. What's going on inside that brain of yours, Dwayne Lee? I mean, I like it. Dwayne drew a deep breath before letting it out slowly. He cupped his hand over Annaline's and inhaled again. You ever feel like there's something dark hanging over your head? I'm not sure what you mean. You feeling down or? I don't know. I just feel different. Been full of anger lately and venom spitting out of my mouth all the time. Maybe it's just the season or something, but lately I've been feeling like I'm taking life and all I got for granted. Remember about this time last year when I found who we thought was Tick, all bloody and dead in the doghouse? I was sure I'd lost my buddy. I mean, how many other black and white bully pits could be out here on our road? Annaline smiled somberly. I know, Tick is one of a kind. I remember how devastated you were when you came in to tell me he had wandered back and had been hit and was gone. Her eyes teared just a bit. I'll never forget how you looked, Dwayne. I thought I might as well have lost you too. I remember how frozen the damn ground was and how long it took me to dig that big of a hole, especially with my eyes so full of tears. What's making you think of that awful day, Dwayne? Don't know, Annaline. This past week or two, I've been feeling sorry for myself, and then suddenly, I'm realizing how much I have to be thankful for. Like you. I take you for granted so dang much, and Tick coming back like a miracle, even though his Houdini tricks piss me the hell off constantly. Dwayne, I'll never forget after you came in all sweaty, even though it was below freezing after you buried Tick. Hearing that scratching on the back door. I know, Annaline. It was like we were being haunted by his ghost. Remember how we both stared at each other? You looked at me like, am I crazy? Dwayne guffawed. You got up so sudden, even though you were dead tired and frozen. We both got to that back door pretty darn fast. Annaline began running her fingers down Dwayne's chest again. You flung that door open and there he was, back from the dead. Annaline snuggled in and kissed her husband's lips, giggling from the mustache and beard hairs tickling. There he was, wanting in like he'd just been let out to pee. Dwayne kissed Annaline, running his tongue across her bottom lip. I know, babe. I never figure out whose dog I buried that cold and frigid day. I'm just glad it wasn't Tick. He leaned into Annaline's ear. Tick may be my best friend, but you, Annaline, are my bestest friend. Tick moaned a low, growly grumble as if he were listening from outside the door and objecting to being his master's second fiddle. Dwayne got up to let him in, and just before he opened the bedroom door, he turned back to Annaline. Get ready, sweet potato, 'cause here he comes. As the door was opened, Tick bullied his way through and flew up and onto the middle of the bed, claiming his spot between them. Chapter 3. The Dinner Guests. Scott looked over at his wife, Mary. What the hell is going on? Have you been talking to Annaline and cooking this whole Thanksgiving dinner thing up? Hell no, Scott. I'm still wondering why you agreed for us to go. He caught me off guard, so much I even agreed to smoke some meat to bring over. I'd smoked some chickens, but that damn dog has already ate several of them. The way I understand it, Annaline's sister and husband will be there too. The whole damned goody-good bunch. Should I break out some venison? And waste good meat on them? You're kidding, right? Well, I ain't gonna go buy nothing. Why did you say we'd bring the main course? Chips or something would have been better. A green bean casserole or rolls. Hell, the meat's the most expensive part of dinner. You ought to cook up something gross like snake or roadkill. She cackled. Kill that fucking dog of theirs that keeps killing our chickens and smoke his ass for their Thanksgiving party. Mary squinted at Scott with an evil sneer. Now that would be some funny shit there. Watching that geezer eat his own damn dog. Scott laughed out loud. Now that I could do. If he shows his damn pork butt over here before next Thursday. They both laughed hysterically. Hell, I may coax that fat turd over myself with a chicken. Mary sounded as she appeared to have a thought. You know. Scott looked over. Uh-oh. Looks like you got those evil cogs in your head going. I'm just a-thinking we can make this little neighborly get-together real interesting. I like the sound of your wicked tone. Be great if those old farts never felt the urge to call us back again. Never have liked them since we moved to the neighborhood. Old farts think they know everything, and that damn chicken-eating dog. Scott's skull changed to wonder. What kind of idea do you have brewing, Mary? Oh, I have the perfect casserole that will go along with smoked bulldog. We'll bring them a special meal they will be so thankful for. It'll be a Thanksgiving meal none of them will ever forget. Mary's eyes were dark yet glimmered with joy. You just get that stupid dog of theirs in your smoker. I'm going to use some of our mushrooms for a tasty side dish. Mary's laugh was insidious. Chapter 4. Tick is gone again. Dwayne rolled up the drive and right off the bat noticed Tick wasn't at the barn waiting. Old Tick must be getting too long in the tooth to sit outside in the cold. Dwayne parked the old Dodge and gave a quick look-see around the barn. He shook his head. I'm gonna start bringing you with again. Annaline was at the door to greet Dwayne as he stood in the coat room taking off his Carhartt and boots. The time change was making it darker sooner, which made the days feel colder and more depressing. Annaline knew Dwayne's mood was changing. He needed sunlight to keep his spirits up the more the years passed. Tick asleep in the living room? He asked. No, I thought you had taken him with you today. I haven't seen him since early this morning. I've been busy all day with getting all the fixings together for Thursday. I hope he hasn't disappeared over to the Maynards again. And just before our big meal. Dwayne headed for the back door. After walking out on the screened porch and glancing around the yard, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. It was followed with a feeling of dread. "Hey, Dick," he yelled out. "Come by, boy." Touched his middle finger and edge of his thumb to his lips and sharply blew, causing the loud whistle that usually brought Dick running around the corner of the house. He waited several seconds and attempted again. Nothing. Dwayne hesitantly closed the back door and moped through the kitchen. He didn't answer, Annalene. Give him a while. He's probably out scrounging the barn or shed. Hope to God he isn't terrorizing chickens. It'll be difficult to have a peaceful dinner with Scott and Mary shooting daggers at me with their eyes. Wednesday morning, Dwayne was up before sunrise, walking around his property looking for Tick. At 8 a.m., he was in the living room with the phone to his ear, listening to the ring sound, hoping Scott would answer with news he could live with. No, Dwayne, haven't seen him. Chickens have been quiet all week. Looked over at Mary and smiled a devilish grin. So, we still on for Thanksgiving? Yeah, I'm sorry. Hope he shows up soon. Maybe he's out frisking with a hot little blue heeler or something. All right, we'll be there tomorrow around noon with some smoked brisket and Mary's favorite casserole. Looking forward to it. Yep, you too. Good luck. Click. Chapter 5. A Thanksgiving to Remember. Just before the Johnsons' door opened, Mary reminded Scott, "Don't eat the casserole. Put a small amount on your plate and bury it under some other dishes, unless you want the trip of a lifetime." Gotcha, babe. And unless you like meat other than beef, stick to the top layer on the plate. He snickered. The door swung open and Annalene was there to greet Scott and Mary. "Come on in, neighbors. This is my little sister Claire and her husband Ben. They live over in Duke County, just past Stack's Mill on Turner's Corner." "Nice to meet y'all. I'm Scott Maynard and this is my sweetheart Mary. We just moved in next door about a year and a half ago. This is real nice you included us, Dwayne. Annalene." "Can I take those dishes out to the kitchen?" Annalene asked. "They smell wonderful." "I sure enough hope they meet up with your standards. They're both Scott's favorites," Mary answered. "Hope you don't mind a little beer drinking with some football on the tube, Scott. Kind of the family Thanksgiving tradition around here," stated Dwayne. "Football, beer, brisket, and the fixins? Life don't get no better." Scott smiled as he responded. His face faked a somber transition. "Did your pup show up?" he asked with drippy concern. Dwayne's mood dimmed. "Nah, I'm still hoping he's just pulling another couple of all-nighters with one of the neighbor's bitches in heat. With any luck, there'll be little cloned puppies come spring." He tried to smile, but if he knew Dwayne, one could tell he was hurting inside. "Have a seat, Scott, and I'll grab you a beer," Annalene said. "Mary, you can come out to the kitchen with Claire and I or watch football out here. Table's already set and I'm just doing some last-minute touches." Ben laughed at whatever joke was told. The truth was, he had had several beers and didn't really hear what was said. It's hard to hear with all the hen cackling going on in the kitchen. Scott and Dwayne both chuckled. Dwayne's appeared a bit forced. "Dwayne, I'm sure sorry about your dog. What was his name?" "His name is still Tick. He'll be back. He has a habit of flying the coop occasionally." Dwayne intentionally tied Tick's disappearance to the word coop. He had felt Scott was trying to be coy, and something about his demeanor today made him sorry he had ever invited him. He didn't want the tension to grow, but he wouldn't put up with any shit from some young move-in. He glanced out to the kitchen where he caught a glimpse of Annalene. She gave him a subtle look, and he winked back at her with an everything-is-fine look in his eyes. Dinner was served, and the table was full of a variety of dishes sitting on the lazy Susan in the middle of the table. Annalene stood before anyone began serving and spoke. This tradition may be new to our guests." She nodded at Scott and Mary. "But we've always gone around the table and spoke one thing we are thankful for in this year of life that is about to turn the page onto the next. I'll start. I'm personally thankful that this year we have new additions to our tradition. Thank you for Scott and Mary." There was silence around the table. Dwayne cleared his throat, and then there was a brief hesitation. I normally suck at this kind of thing. I'm a quiet, well-weathered old guy, and I reckon I'm already the most fortunate man that there ever was. I was blessed with a woman who I truly don't deserve. She stuck by me through it all. She still loves me with all my faults. I'm thankful. I'm blessed. I'm also saddened on this blessed day, but damn it, I'm hungry too. Annalene, I love you, sweet potato. Always will. Tick, you damned old cantankerous friend, get your ass home. And last but not least, pass that brisket as quick as possible. Silence again. "I guess I'll just say the obvious," Ben began. "I love my wife, Claire. Married into a much more stable and loving family than I ever came from. I'm thankful for that. Great in-laws, wonderful wife, nice farm, and now some new friends. Prayers Tick makes it home, 'cause I know how much he means to Dwayne. Amen." I just echo what my wonderful husband just said. I'll add that I'm thankful Scott and Mary are here to share this meal and day with us too. Claire pinched her eyes closed even tighter. Scott cleared his throat and quickly began speaking. "I wasn't sure what this day was gonna bring, honestly. We ain't been the best of neighbors, and I'm feeling a bit ashamed of that fact at the moment. My wife and I aren't the easiest people to get to know, and I realize that. I'm thankful that these people saw past our unneighborliness and invited us, nonetheless. I'm thankful and hope everyone enjoys this day and what the unknown can bring." Mary snickered under her breath. She fidgeted a moment before stuttering, "I ain't no public speaking kind of person. This has been eye-opening, and I'm hoping everyone eats up and enjoys. The way I see it, we all gonna have moments we ain't expecting. I'd just say be thankful for whatever they bring, understanding them or not. Sometimes it's those experiences you don't expect that bring you the clearest answers you didn't even know was questions. And I guess that's all I got to say about it. Dig in and eat up. Amen." Annalene spun the dishes on the Lazy Susan over to the newest guests. "Your special company, you go first." "No, ma'am, you're the host. I insist you start. All the trouble you went to and to include us, I insist." Scott then spun the main course to Annalene. Everyone took turns serving themselves the food that was in front of them. Scott looked around and noticed that everyone's plates were full of the smoked meat and casserole he and Mary had brought. The conversation lulled occasionally as everyone enjoyed tasting the different dishes. "Scott, this smoked brisket is really good. It's flavorful like I've never tasted before, and very tender," Annalene commented. "Do you have a special marinade?" Ben asked. Scott smiled before he answered. Yes, I do. It's a special family secret recipe. So y'all like the flavor? Some people say there's a bit of a bite to it, but I think it's tasty. No bark at all." Claire chimed in. "This casserole is wonderful too. Is this egg and mushrooms?" Mary nodded. "Again, like Scott said, it's my family's recipe. I'm glad you like it. Eat up. I don't want to take anything home. This was made just for you folks for your kindness." "This is beef brisket, right, Scott?" Dwayne asked. "Yep, 100% right out of the pit." He glanced at Mary. "It has an odd texture. Very good, though," Dwayne complimented. The conversations remained steady, each complimenting the other's offerings as the bowls, dishes, and pans each became less and less full. 20 minutes later, Scott and Mary began noticing eyes becoming glossier and the grins becoming wider across the other guests' mouths. The fun was just about to begin. Scott was questioning his motive after the warming and thankful comments that had been shared just before the meal began. But it didn't take long to stir the memories of Dwayne's damned bully pit wreaking devastation on his chickens and the lack of care Dwayne showed when he had complained about his dog. Mary, on the other hand, was enjoying herself watching as the others began tripping. She knew Annalene had been very judgmental about her and Scott when they moved in. She had heard talk about Annalene questioning others in town because of all the visitors they received and the odd hours she and Scott kept. Damn busybody old bogies, she quietly thought as she began realizing they were beginning to see trails in their vision in the movement of their hands and arms when gesturing in conversation. The grins and giggles were beginning to overtake the unsuspecting victims. It wouldn't be long before they would be putty in her hands. Their good trips would be redirected into nightmares. Mary giggled both at the thought and the sight of the show before them. Knowing Dwayne was eating his favorite dog in the world gave her butterflies in her stomach. If he only knew. But he sure as hell would find out very soon. Dwayne sliced another bite from the strip of dog that lay across his plate, his now dilated pupils filling up his entire eyeballs. Mary looked at Scott and winked. Scott smiled and shook his head as he eyed the long carving knife laid beside the dish of meat. His eyes skimmed across the 4 oblivious dupes that were quickly sliding out of reality into the wacky antics of psilocybin mushroom world. He looked over at the dish and then to Mary. You must have really sweetened the taste of your casserole, honey. These clowns really cleaned their plates. I'm thinking they're way overdosed. He laughed wickedly. He got up and excused himself to the bathroom as he winked once more to his wife. His plan was to run outside to his truck and collect the zip ties he had gathered for the late afternoon activities. Annalene began to say something to Scott but looked over at her sister and broke into uncontrollable giggles. Ben and Dwayne began to speak, but neither seemed able to spit their words out correctly. They too quickly began laughing, their mouths grinning so widely from cheek to cheek their faces began to look as if they'd split. This seemed to add to Claire's laughter, which drew Annalene into the collection of hysterical cackles. As Scott exited the front door, he smiled at Mary, acknowledging her expertise in the plan for retribution against the Johnsons for being less than welcoming a year and a half ago when they moved in next door. She mouthed the sentence very clearly to him before he walked out. I get to slit that fucking bitch's throat. She's mine. And then she blew a kiss to her man as the storm door slammed closed with a loud thwack and brought a quick silence that turned into more uproar of laughter when nothing else happened. Chapter 6. Animated Perspectives. Dwayne shook his head back and forth while he sat at the table. He looked at the can of beer that stood firm beside his nearly empty plate. He stared blankly as the colors and textures of the piles of leftovers gently began to move and mix, forming what appeared to be a new life form from some alien planet. He snickered to himself, but deep down, he felt a brewing fear. His heart was racing, forming excitement within, but his muscles and tendons to cause movement were dueling with his brainwaves. The signals were crossing, and he knew it. It caused frustration, but then the need to laugh overtook him again. The beer can was becoming a tall silo sitting on the table. It begged him to pick it up to take a sip, but his lack of coordination would not allow it to be. He knew the world he was now entrapped was not the world he had known earlier in the day. He feared this world would be the one he was lost in forever. And while that should create fear within, he felt another barrage of laughter building and ready to overflow from his insides. He scanned the room for his sweet potato, Annalene. He felt like he needed to protect her. Noises of the football game in the living room began to build louder, and as it blended or churned into the laughter and sounds of people talking around the table, it became impossible to divide one sound from the other and understand what was happening. Dwayne was stuck in a world he couldn't fathom, and it was building into a panic that was pushing his heart into overdrive. Annalene's laughter ended abruptly. It was as if a door slammed loudly or the clap of thunder snapped her brain into an abrupt stop. Her eyes were as wide as saucers as she scanned the area, dividing familiar faces with those that didn't fit completely into her psyche. The front door slammed again and drew her attention. Annalene knew it was the neighbor, but somehow couldn't remember him leaving the table. Her mind stirred, trying to piece together the previous moments. It was as if the jigsaw puzzle she had just finished were now scattered about on the floor for no reason. Ben and Claire sat talking and giggling with each other as if no one else were present in the room. And Mary, Scott's wife? The smile she boldly wore scared Annalene. She was clueless why, but her urge to laugh was suddenly transformed into the need to scream for help. Scott walked up behind Dwayne and slipped pieces of plastic around his wrists and then pulled his hands behind him. Dwayne looked stunned but made no attempts to resist. Scott then walked around the table and did the same thing to Ben before he knew what was happening. There was nothing but confused silence as each of the family members sat still, glassy eyes with large dark pupils lost in the middle of their large white orbs. Scott zip-tied Claire's hands together and then worked his way further around the table to Annalene, where in her stunned state, held her hands up to be hog-tied also. Mary scooted her chair away from the table and slowly stood up. She walked over to Scott and they both looked into each other's eyes. "Oh, baby, I told you this would work out perfect." She smiled and then moved her lips closer to his before sliding her tongue out and teasing Scott. Everyone sitting confined at the table watched in confusion. A snicker slipped out of Ben's mouth before he let the words spill. "You guys gonna do it right here in front of us?" Silence. Scott pulled back from his wife's lips and grip. He slowly walked over and picked up the pan of meat. He walked over to Dwayne and stopped as he stared at him. He set the plate in front of Dwayne and then took a fork and knife and began cutting a bite-sized piece of the brisket. "You really enjoyed the flavor and tenderness, didn't you?" he questioned Dwayne as he lifted the fork and brought it up to Dwayne's mouth. "You like another bite? See if you can't taste something familiar." He released a low, rumbly, and raspy guffaw. "It certainly was satisfying smoking this meat. In fact, it's the first time I've ever skinned dog and marinated it for the smoker. I must admit, though, I myself did not taste it as a true chef would to make sure it was satisfactory, as I don't believe I'd care for canine." He smiled again. "But by the way y'all ate it up, I'm guessing old Tick made quite a tasty main course. Hell, he probably has a flavorful undertone of chicken, too. As many of mine as he fucking ate." It took a few moments for Scott's statement to take hold. Their fucked up minds just couldn't process what the sentence really meant. It was Claire whose stomach first began to heave up and down. Her face first pale white before becoming shades of yellowish green. "You ain't gonna make a mess on Annalene's dinner table, are you?" Mary questioned. "'Cause I'll make you lick it right back up. Probably won't be quite as delightful the second go-round." Mary smiled. "Now buck up, Miss Pretty Little Prim and Proper. The fun is just beginning." Mary's eyes became dark slits that sank deep into her darkened sockets, and her look sent instant shivers up Claire's spine. "Y'all treated us like shit for a year and a half, talking trash about us in town and letting your damn dog destroy our chickens. And you think a little holiday dinner is going to clear consciences and make us all hunky-dory happy neighbors? Well, bullshit. It's time to play now, and it's by our rules. Ain't that right, Scott?" Her dark hair hung over her eyes as her witch-like thin face grew more hate-filled by the second. "We're going to see you take torture while y'all flying high. Yeehaw!" Mary cackled. Silence once again, except for Claire's sniffles and Mary's giggles. Everyone else, except for Scott, sat in a bewildered daze. Annalene looked across the table and focused on tiny tears that were escaping the corners of Dwayne's eyes. His eyes were glossed over, shinier than she had ever seen them before. They didn't look real. Her heart pounded in deep thunderous beats like a bass drum echoing inside, shaking the walls. The crazy laughter that filled the room just minutes ago suddenly morphed into panicked fear, consuming terror and anxiety. Annalene couldn't catch her breath as her eyes bounced between Dwayne's, her sisters, and the neighbors who were holding them captive after drugging them. The room's walls felt as if they were moving closer, tightening the space around her and stealing her breath. She felt faint. She needed to throw up, but remembered what her captor had told Claire. Scott's face was zooming in and out of Dwayne's vision. He saw the knife in Scott's hand. The swirls of light and shiny chrome metallic strands danced in front of him in swirling motions like a river of blended substances from another world. The feeling in the pit of his stomach caused an ache that begged to rise and spill from his mouth. His surroundings were like nothing he had seen in all his life. His desire to protect his wife tore at every fiber of his being, yet it mattered not how hard he pulled against the resistance around his wrists. They tightened even more. The ache and burn defeated his ability to win that battle. During all the oddity and horror around him, a smoky gas bubbled up from his stomach. As it escaped in a belch of garbled retch and bile, he was reminded he had eaten a meal consisting of his best friend, Tick. The sick bastard in front of him, darting in and out of the crazy mix of blurred colors, had killed his dog and cooked him, feeding him to us in a meal of Thanksgiving. Who in hell could do that? What had he or Annalene done to deserve such an attack on their family? The chill of the blade's steel tip drug just lightly enough across his throat to send the cold, sharp tingles which begged him to take the action to flinch. His jumbled thoughts were disconnected from his ability to respond. Every emotion and feeling felt foreign, including the saliva in his mouth, which now felt like thick straw, adding to his confused judgments being charred from all the differing senses attacking at once. His vision began to fade, his receptors overtaxed. He called out, "Annalene, I love you. I'm sorry." The familiar sound of something being dragged across the back screen door awakened Dwayne from the intoxicated stupor he had fallen into. It couldn't be, though. It sounded like Tick's paws scratching to be let in, a sound both Annalene and he knew well. But he had been told Tick was dead. Worse yet, he had been told he and his family had eaten him. He must be hallucinating. Had Scott lied? Was this some kind of sick joke? The sound of claws dragging down the screen again drew attention. This time the screen door banged a couple of times as if Tick were trying to open it. "Mary, go check out that noise, baby doll. I gotta watch these 4 toys careful like," Scott snapped out. Mary sauntered by, again looking at Annalene and softly saying, "Oh, do you have an evening of horror ahead of you, Miss Too Good?" And then she laughed as she headed out toward the kitchen and to the back of the house. Annalene looked over at Scott, who still had the knife in his hand close to her husband's throat. "Why? What did we ever—" "Shut up!" Scott yelled. Several moments went by and Scott hollered out towards the back where he had sent his wife. "Mary, what's going on?" There was a clatter and a bang followed by a shrill scream. Mary yelled for help but was quickly muffled by the sound of growls and chewing noises, gurgling and hissing. Scott let the knife down and away from Dwayne's neck. As he began to walk past Dwayne towards the kitchen, there was a low rumble that sounded like a big dog's warning of an impending attack. Scott looked down at Dwayne as it sounded like it was coming from him. Scott leaned over Dwayne's shoulder, and as he did, Dwayne looked up and into Scott's eyes. They locked stares. Dwayne's eyes held the look of a rabid pit bull, and a low grumble was resonating inside his throat. The growl kept drawing on, never changing tone or tempo. It was the kind of rumble that would stop an intruder in their tracks, sensing the impending doom about to occur. Scott's eyes were locked with Dwayne's, but Dwayne's eyes no longer resembled what they were. They weren't blue anymore. Instead, they held a brownish-yellow hue with a sharp, deadly focus within. His eyes looked exactly like Tick's eyes. Scott stood completely still, his legs and hands now trembling as if he knew he was about to meet head-on with a beast hungry with vengeance. The low rumble became louder. The racket in the back room had subsided, leaving only heavy breaths and sighs, soon followed by the pitter-pat of paws getting louder and louder. Scott merely tightened the grip on the blade he held, but it was just enough movement to send the growling beast surging back and up, grabbing Scott by the throat. It wasn't Tick that grabbed him. It was Dwayne's jaws that snapped closed and began shaking and pulling like a rabid dog in fight to the death. There were gurgles that came out with Scott's muted cries along with the sound of air hissing in escape from the open wound in his neck. He quickly dropped the knife and fell helpless to his knees, his sheer weight ripping a chunk from his neck away as the grip of Dwayne's snarling mouth held tight. It all happened so quickly that Annalene, Ben, and Claire didn't seem to have time to even conceive what was or had just happened. When Dwayne looked up and over to them from across the table, the mere sight of his bloodied face caused shrieks filled with terror and trepidation at the grotesque sight of what their eyes fell victim of seeing. Horror-struck and shaking in their skin, still unable to do more than tremble and attempt to look away, hoping it was all just a ghastly nightmare. Claire's head dropped with a loud thud to the tabletop, now passed out only inches away from the casserole dish that had begun this grisly drug-induced hell. Annalene sat sobbing uncontrollably, dazed and confused, not knowing if Dwayne was dead or a transformed animal from the depths of the unknown. She was incoherent and lost in the hallucinations still coming on strong in waves from the mushroom concoction Mary had brought. Ben's eyes were open so wide there was bright white that showed completely around his large, still dilated pupils. Tick came trotting in from the kitchen, his once white and black face now covered in crimson red with strands of black hair still clinging to his fangs. Dwayne lifted his head and looked at his faithful dog. "Tick, you saved us, boy. But," Dwayne's eyes scanned the table and saw the tray of meat. He told me he killed you, boy, and cooked you." Tears filled Dwayne's eyes as he hollered out to his wife, "Annalene, sweet potato, baby, are you okay? I love you, girl." It was as if their energy all died in unison. Each of their heads began bobbing, their eyes becoming empty as the adrenaline quickly oozed from their veins. Hands still zip-tied together behind them, one by one their heads dropped until either their chins rested on their chests or their forehead landed on the tabletop. Silence. The sound of a body pulling itself across the floor melded with subtle moans of what sounded like a woman and broke the dead stillness that had encompassed the morbid setting around the Thanksgiving dinner table. Fans cheering at the football game could be heard on the television from the living room. Tick's low, gravelly growl began slow and steady, but was elevating alarm as Mary crawled closer to where Dwayne was motionless, his head on the dinner table, drool spilling from his mouth mixing with blood dripping from a red line across his neck. Mary held a sharp stainless steel carving blade in one hand as she pulled herself closer to the chair holding Dwayne's body. Scott lay next to it, a crumpled pile of flannel and jeans, his head lying a pool of blood. Tick's body stiffened as he watched Mary pull herself closer, one hand gripped the chair leg, the other clutching a knife. Tick's growl increased as Mary pulled herself upright, knife held overhead, ready to plunge into Dwayne's back. Tick charged just as the front door opened. A thunderous bam shattered the quiet as Mary fell backwards onto the floor, blood oozing from the tiny round hole in the center of her forehead. Tick ran up and snapped his jaws at her, but soon sensed no threat in her deathly stillness and sat next to his master's chair he was tied to. The reflection of blue and red lights bounced off the tree limbs that could be seen through the window as it mixed with the changing television tones. Deputy Brown stepped up onto the porch and peered in through the open door at Sheriff Buckner. "What the fuck happened here, Bill?" Sheriff Bill Buckner turned and slowly responded, "God damned if I know. This is a Thanksgiving dinner from hell." Epilogue. Tonight's weather will bring in another cold front from the northwest, dropping temperatures to a subnormal 18 degrees and then warming throughout tomorrow into the upper 30s. In other breaking news, it seems Black Friday came a day early during a Thanksgiving get-together for 4 family members who are in guarded care at Barton County Hospital recuperating from a holiday gone awry. Sheriff Bill Buckner states that 2 deceased unnamed individuals were neighbors of the recovering victims. As it turns out, the sheriff and his deputies investigating possible drug dealings happened onto a skirmish just in time to avert a possible murder. Police later found an undisclosed amount of drugs and marijuana in the deceased couple's home next door. They also uncovered an illegal psilocybin mushroom farm at the same address's basement. The 4 family members are expected to survive, but were apparently dosed by ingesting a casserole containing a large amount of the mushrooms before being tied up and tortured. One of the 2 suspects was shot and killed by Sheriff Buckner as he came through the door, stumbling onto an attempted murder in progress. The suspect, nor her husband, survived. More details as they are uncovered. We here at Channel 11 hope you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving Day, and remember to show kindness during your Black Friday shopping. Only 28 more shopping days until Christmas. I sure hope you enjoyed tonight's tale, Thanksgiving from Hell, written by Eli Pope. Eli Pope is a major writing contributor for Fear from the Heartland. Eli began his love of creating stories back in high school creative writing classes. The passion lay dormant for decades, while life took him different directions. The stories never left, and he finally succumbed to the voices in his head, telling him to put them on paper. And put them on paper he did, earning the Literary Titan Award for The Judgment Game and The Spark of Wrath, books 1 and 2 of the Mason Jar series, which you, dear listener, can hear on audible.com, performed by yours truly, Paul J. McSorley. The only thing I will tell you, Billy J. Cater is a bad dude. You can hook up with Eli Pope at his website, elipope.com. That's Eli, E-L-I, Pope, P-O-P-E.com. He can also be located on Facebook at author Eli Pope, or search groups on Facebook, The Mason Jar Room. Ah, the wonders of childhood. It's funny how even the bravest and sternest of adults can soften to the pull of youthful nostalgia, and how much that pull can warp the things around us. Join us for this ethereal tale about love, loss, and friendship of the sinister variety. And now, for your indulgence, guess who's coming for dinner? Growing up, my wife Rhea's best friend in life was her brother Evan. Even with the age and gender difference, they were kindred spirits. Out of millions of genetic possibilities, somehow they were born with the same mental framework. He taught her how to ride a bike, stood up to bullies for her, even taught her how to throw her first punch when she said she was ready to handle things independently. Evan died when my wife was 15. Her family assumed the person driving was under the influence of alcohol. Not that they could be sure. Police said it was a classic hit and run. According to bits and pieces she's told me, their family all grieved in different ways. My mother-in-law turned to the bottle, while my supposed father-in-law turned to the comforts of other women. As for Rhea, she decided to get married and leave that hellhole town as soon as legally possible. That's just what she did. We first met when I was 17 years old. I was blowing off steam after work at the local pool hall. She looked my way and hasn't looked in any other direction since. We got married, moved far away, and soon after had our daughter Eva. Neither one of us had much experience with babies, but that little angel was made for us. She taught us how much love our hearts were capable of, while we taught her how to be the best little person that she could be. The years and milestones flew by. Before long, she had bloomed into a spunky 8-year-old kid. We had just bought a house, packed everything up, and moved 2 states away for better work opportunities. Eva was so young that there was a chance she wouldn't remember much, but we were still worried about how she had transitioned into a new home in a new state. We had weighed all the pros and cons for weeks beforehand and ultimately decided that moving was best for us. Things were business as usual until Eva came into the living room with big news one day. She bounced in, the knees of her khakis blackened with dirt. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." She beamed through a smile riddled with discarded baby teeth. "What have you been doing out there, Boo Bear?" Rhea asked. "Your pants are filthy. You'll need a bath later on, don't forget." "Ugh, I just took one last night," Eva whined, pulling an orange autumn leaf from her wild hair. "I was outside planting flower seeds. I snuck some in the cart with Dad the other day at the hardware store." She interrupts me before I have time to speak. "The good news is I made a new friend today." That's nice," my wife said dismissively, her face once again buried in her phone. "Flower seeds? This time of year?" I interjected. "Oh, sweetheart, the last thing I want to do in life is hurt your feelings, but it's just the wrong time of year for that. Thanksgiving is almost here, and the ground will likely be frozen by then, my love." "Hey," Rhea snapped. "That's enough out of you, sir." She turned back to her phone, softening her tone while addressing our daughter. "Daddy is silly. They will grow when the ground thaws. Tell me about your new friend, sweetheart." "His name is Mr. Evans, and he's really, really nice. He showed me how to make the rows straight for our flowers to grow." Rhea's head shot up at hearing the new name. "Evans, you said?" Her eyes misted over briefly before she turned away and wiped at them. "What's wrong, Mama?" our little girl asked with mounting concern etched on her face. I decided to handle the question so my wife wouldn't have to. "Mommy had an older brother named Evan, sweetheart. She just misses him is all. She'll be okay." Rhea straightens up once I say this, walking over and giving Eva a massive hug before leaving the room to make grilled cheese and tomato soup for our lunch. A week had gone by, and by that time Eva had talked about Mr. Evans quite a bit. She couldn't tell us how old he was, and she never left the front yard. After the third time she mentioned him, I decided to watch her through the window during playtime. I never saw anyone else in the yard, just Eva, talking to herself and picking up rocks. After seeing that, I assumed Mr. Evans was an imaginary friend, conjured by our daughter to ease the pain of leaving her friends behind back home. My wife, however, wasn't so sure. Rhea rushed up to me, eyes alight with excitement. "It's Evan. My brother's been watching over us this whole time." I looked at her incredulously as she paused to catch her breath. "Eva was outside, singing a song that we made up as kids. When I asked her where she heard it, she said Mr. Evans told her to ask her mom." Grateful tears began streaming down her face. I didn't have the heart to tell her my opinion on the matter. We had been sleeping strictly back-to-back for weeks as it was. I hadn't seen her that happy since before the move. Still, though, I had to flirt with the issue. "Honey, are you sure it's not just an imaginary friend she's made for herself? This Mr. Evans didn't show up until after we moved, after she was forced to adjust to new surroundings and a new life." My wife's eyes bulged in disbelief just before she whipped her head away as if slapped. After a few moments, she returned her gaze to me, cold as stone. Her jaw was clenched in bitter anger as the grit in her voice traveled through our living room. "Why? You're asking why? What does it matter? He's here now. You think I'm crazy, don't you? Well, I'm telling you, there is no way she could have learned that song without someone teaching it to her." I raised my hands in defeat, not wanting to press it and further upset her. "All right, Rhea, all right," I conceded. "I'm sorry I doubted you. Just keep an eye out, okay? This whole thing makes me nervous. We should get some sleep. It's a big day tomorrow. Lots to do." The next afternoon, Rhea ran to our kitchen table, handing me a dirtied Polly Pocket figurine. "I lost this the year that Evan died. Eva was playing with it by the garden." Tears glistened in her eyes as she smiled towards the ceiling. "It's a sign. There's no denying it now." Just then we were interrupted by happy squeals from the front yard. The front door banged against the wall behind it, making us both jump as our daughter burst into the kitchen. "Mommy, Mr. Evans wants to come to dinner tonight. It is Thanksgiving after all. Can you set an extra plate?" My wife giggled with astonishment and nodded eagerly. I gently grabbed her elbow, a terrible feeling in my gut. "Rhea." The look she gave me stopped me cold in my tracks, the hatred in her eyes stealing the words from my tongue. We prepared dinner together that night. We stood side by side in the kitchen as a family, but no one spoke but Eva. You'd never be able to tell that my wife was mad by the way she flitted about the kitchen, preparing everything with extra care. There was a moment where we shared a laugh. Eva was shucking corn cobs unsuccessfully, continuously fumbling them as they slipped through her tiny hands. We almost reverted to our usual selves, but it was infinitesimally fleeting. Eva set the table for 4, just as expected. We sat down around a steaming roasted turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, rolls, and an array of vegetables. I reached out for a drumstick as Eva wailed in protest. "No, Daddy. We have to say grace first. Dear God, thank you for our food, Kitty, Mommy, and Daddy. Oh, and Mr. Evans, too. And..." Before she could finish her prayer, the doorbell rang. My wife and I froze in foreboding confusion as Eva rushed through the door. "Ghosts can't ring doorbells, Rhea," I snapped at my wife. Horror shone in her eyes as she mumbled a lame response. "Maybe it's someone else." I didn't bother to answer, only rushed towards the front door. God knows who could have met Eva at the other side of that door. I was too late, however. Moments later, to my horror, she appeared back in the dining room, holding the hand of a dirtied older man. We both stood up from the table, Rhea rushing over to Eva and grabbing her away from the strange man. I reached in the waistband of my pants, only to remember I had taken my gun and holster off when I had gotten home that evening. The man straightened up, brushed layers of filth off of his sleeves, and began to speak. "Good evening, Tom, Rhea. My name is Charles Evans." He turned to Eva sharply. "Honey, I'm going to need you to go on up to your room for a moment. I'll call you down when it's time for ice cream." He smiled at her through grimy teeth. Normally, I would never condone a strange person telling my child what to do, but at that moment, her room seemed like the safest option. I nodded my head towards her, and she skipped off to her room, humming an unknown melody. My wife sobbed into her dinner napkin, a myriad of negative emotions consuming her mind and spirit. "You're not my Evan? Well, what do you want from us?" she stammered through sobs. "Don't be afraid, my dear," he cooed towards Rhea. "I'm just an old friend, part of the family if you think about it a certain way." The man strode to my wife's side of the table, wiping away her tears with dirt-smudged hands. "Don't worry, darling. You got to be one of the lucky ones. I left a whole life for you to live. I spent a lot of my life watching you and your brother when you were young. After he died and the town went into a frenzy for justice, I thought it was best to lay low for a while." He stooped over and slowly inhaled my wife's hair. You smell just like him. I made a mistake. I took him too young. But you see, you're older now. You've had more of a life to live, and now I'm ready to complete the set." Hope you enjoyed tonight's story, Guess Who's Coming for Dinner by N.M. Brown. N.M. Brown is a Florida native, wife and mother of 3 who reads about chasing away monsters to her kids before bed, then writing them down to get them out of her head. She is also the chief operations manager for our very own Chilling Tales for Dark Nights network. Her written work appears in over 50 horror anthologies, all of which are available on Amazon.com. If you'd like to hear more stories by N.M. Brown, you can search for her by name on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights archives. If you enjoyed tonight's story hosted by yours truly, Paul J. McSorley, you can search my name on Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on YouTube for additional previous stories. If you'd like to hear more lengthy tales, be sure to take a look at my audiobooks. Available now on audible.com or just visit paulsbooks.net. That's PAULSBOOKS.net. You can also find me personally on Facebook and Twitter. And with that, listeners, our weekly journey into the psyche has just about come to a close. But before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us for tonight's episode and remind you to take a moment to stop by our iTunes page and leave Chilling Tales for Dark Nights a 5-star review and a kind word. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can find an archive of our work going back to 2012. And consider signing up as a patron at our website, chillingtalesfordarknights.com, to show your support and get all of our content ad-free. I'm your host for Fear from the Heartland, Paul J. McSorley. I've enjoyed the titillation tonight. Ooh, there's that word again. Thank you for joining me. Hope to see you again next week at Fear from the Heartland.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.